I transcribed this solo from a track called Cellular Contact by the Corneille-Roelofs trio. And they were a fantastic Dutch piano trio active in the late 90s and early aughts, right up until Corneille's untimely death in 2005. But the reason why I'm sharing this is because after, basically stumbling in the dark for over 20 years, I think I finally understand this solo and Corneille's possible thought process behind it. And I think there's some valuable information there about, practically about some cool concepts from 20th century harmony, but more conceptually about the importance of critical thinking while transcribing music. So let's dive right in, shall we? So this whole solo is played over a B pedal point supplied by the upright bass, and Corneille starts with this phrase. Yeah. So if we combine the information from both hands and the pedal point, it's very clear that he is thinking and playing in B diminished. And while it sounds very spicy, I think that's because of the left hand, because he plays that. And if I'm thinking about a shell voicing over B diminished, I'm rather thinking this. That's a more sensible thing to do, right? Just playing the 7 and the 3. But he plays this, so you get that. And that is a very cool sound, because somehow it makes the already ambiguous nature of diminished harmony even more ambiguous. Corneille is thinking about the other axis in the diminished scale. Because if you look at all the notes in the diminished scale, then you basically have the axis of the B diminished chord, but you also have the axis of the C sharp diminished chord. And I think he's thinking of this because the next chord in the next phrase is built on a G, and the chord after that is built on an E. So you have, right, this outline of the other axis. And that's interesting to experiment with, I think. So yeah, cool. So looking at the next phrase, he is still outlining the B diminished scale in the right hand. But again, the interesting thing is happening in the left, because he's playing that voicing. And I think this is so stupidly frank. It's like, yeah, I'm playing a flat 2. What are you going to do about it? A more sensible approach to, having a flat 2 or 9 in your chord is to spread the root and the flat 2 or 9, like this. Or if it's a two-handed voicing, that maybe, but not this. I think it's beautiful. I did my first pass at transcribing this when I was 18. That's, 21 years ago. And I was 3 years into my piano studies at that point. And my understanding of even basic harmony was very limited at that time, let alone concepts from, 20th century harmony. So this next phrase just flew right over my head. It was clear to me that he was still outlining the B diminished scale in the right hand. But again, the left hand threw me off a bit because he's using this cluster voicing. And I just couldn't understand why you would use a left hand voicing with that F sharp in it while you're playing a scale that has an F in it. So turns out, if you spend some time with the likes of Bartók and our friend Persichetti here, who wrote a fantastic book about 20th century harmony, this doesn't really faze you that much anymore, because this can be simply explained as polymodality, or using two modes built on the same tonic at the same time. So you can use C Phrygian in the left hand and C Lydian in the right and combine these colors, which is a pretty wild concept. It could be explained like that, like Corneille is using some kind of minor mode with the natural 2 in there, and it's hard to tell from just these 3 notes. And in his right, he's playing the E half whole diminished scale, which coincidentally has the same exact notes as the B diminished scale. And I wouldn't really bet money on whether Corneille used polymodality consciously here or not. It could also very well be that his left hand just instinctively reached for that cluster voicing, and it's a mistake. But at least it's explainable from a theoretical point of view, like this. Now, I was talking about the importance of critical thinking while transcribing music earlier in the video, and this very much applies to these last few bars in the solo, because Corneille plays this. Yeah, this made 0 sense to me. So first of all, it turns out I transcribed this too accurately, and it took me 20 years to figure that out. Because what I was hearing was this set of notes. He's using this set of notes in this register, and then only when he goes up in the higher register, he uses that set of notes with an E flat added to that. And that by itself already didn't make sense. Why would you alter, your notes up there, especially in such a blazing cadenza-like thing? So I kept clinging to that idea that this is the set of notes he uses. And why would you use those set of notes over a beat? Is this even a scale to begin with? And it led me down this whole wrong path, basically, because I was thinking about maybe it's one of the 72 raga modes in Carnatic music, which I found actually has a mode with the same notes. Or I was thinking about an F augmented scale with an added flat 2, but it was far-fetched and it didn't sit right with me. And a sensible explanation only came when I started to realize that Corneille just flubbed that E flat in the lower register, and he meant to play that note all along. Because of course it's improvised and he decides on the spot what to play, and God forbid he doesn't play perfectly. So just because it's not audible on the recording doesn't mean he didn't intend to play it. So yeah, with that in mind, it made me realize that this set of notes, these are just 2 stacked tetrachords, 2 identical tetrachords stacked on top of each other. And well, depending on your definition, a tetrachord is just a set of 4 notes. Corneille is thinking more texturally and motorically here as opposed to harmonically. And it reminds me a bit of this technique by Chick Corea that he called 10 Little Drummers, I think. It's from one of his keyboard workshop videos from the 80s. And he uses his fingers like drumsticks, and he creates these sort of intricate, paradiddles to create these sort of textural things without thinking too much about the notes he plays. And I think Corneille was going after the same thing here. If you really want to put this in a theoretical framework, you could also see this set of notes as a synthetic scale. And I found out that Busoni was already mentioning them in his 1904 sketch of a new aesthetic of music, which is a cool essay, quite ahead of its time. But Persichetti is also talking about that. And he describes, let me read that. He describes its construction as placing any number of major, minor, and augmented seconds in any order to create an original or synthetic scale. And while that's a good definition, I don't think that's very practical to start experimenting with these scales. Because, okay, if you can place any of these intervals in any order, then, how many permutations are there? Like thousands upon thousands. So where to even start? So I think a more practical approach to start experimenting with these comes from this big book by W.A. Matthew, Harmonic Experience. And there he constructs these synthetic scales by building them from a major scale that he divides into 2 separate tetrachords. And he then just lowers or raises scale degrees. So if we would lower the A to an A flat, then we would get this interesting sound, and not based on one of the major or minor modes, which is another prerequisite to even be called a synthetic scale. And you can add a sharp 4 in there as well, and a flat 2, and create these sort of super interesting colors. So finally, if we go back to, you know, Corneille's synthetic scale, what I would do if I would like to implement this in my own vocabulary, then I would just treat it as any scale. So I would first make sure that I can play it ascending and descending with a fingering that feels natural. Then I would probably play the scale in interval patterns. So patterns of 3, like that. And then with every interval you can find, and then finding out the harmonic possibilities with that. So if you take a look at the set of notes, you can find many chords in here, like F major, F sharp minor, C sharp major, A minor, C augmented, C sharp augmented, C diminished. Yeah, so you could play this scale over any of these chords. So I could play an F here and then... right? That's quite an interesting sound over a major chord. So yeah, that was my very convoluted video about just some random solo. But yeah, thanks for watching.